very intense 4-month sprint in session. And so I think you can do that. You can think about like, how do I want my staff to feel and how do I want to show up for them? Because the way you show up for them is how they're going to show up for you. It's just like any other kind of relationship. People want to feel seen, heard, and loved. People want to feel about a part of something bigger than themselves, and they want to feel like they're making a difference.
Welcome to the East Anchorage Book Club. I'm your host, Andrew Gray. The purpose of this podcast is to tell the stories of Alaskans of interest and importance. Our guest this Labor Day is Representative Jennie Armstrong of West Anchorage, and the topic is how to be a better boss. This is Jennie's second interview with me. The first was on East Anchorage Matters last year, where we learned her life story. I will link to that in the show notes. This episode came about because of questions from legislators about how to better manage our legislative staff. For many new legislators, managing staff was not something that we were prepared to do or had given much thought to. I, for one, had no idea what I was doing and needed help. Jennie Armstrong has been a boss since founding her own company 8 years ago. She has explored management techniques in earnest and done deep work, including psychotherapy, to make herself a better leader. I offer that since this conversation is almost like a therapy session for me, exploring some of the mistakes I made during my first 2 years in office. And I want to offer an important disclaimer. The staff that I have had the past 2 years have been amazing. When I talk about any office failures, they are my failures. This conversation is intended to help bosses do better. I'm grateful for the wonderful staff I've had, and I wish I could have done better by them. Jennie Armstrong, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be back.
So the purpose of this podcast, we're releasing it on Labor Day, is to talk about how to be a good boss. I didn't really know where to begin. This has never been a goal of mine to be in charge of employees. So the idea of reading books about how to be a good boss, that was not appealing to me. You have read a lot of books about this stuff. This is something that you have made yourself an expert on.
So I run a company and I've been managing since my first job out of college. I started managing someone at 22. And I've always managed, I've run a company for 8 years, and then I have the legislature. In my role as a representative, my team more manages me. And I communicate really clearly, hey, here's what I know about myself. Here's how I need you to help me. Here's what I know I need from you so that we can maximize all of our shared goals. It's really different for me in a business context. It's also just like a perspective, like knowing what you need.
And just because I didn't even know where to begin, and you recommended books to me. So I'm grateful for that. One of the big takeaways that I got in one of the books that we're going to talk about, Radical Candor by Kim Scott, was just talking about how being a good boss requires time.
Yeah.
It requires work. It requires dedicated work toward being a boss. And I just, as a new legislator, I felt like I had no time to do any of the things I was supposed to do. The last thing I was going to do was invest time in mapping out the agenda for my staff meeting.
I'll say there's a little bit of upfront time, but the goal when you have staff and when you're growing a team is that it actually buys back your time. That is another book that I'm reading right now called Buy Back Your Time by Dan Martell. And so the idea is that you shouldn't be creating the agendas long term. You should set the expectation of how meetings are run, and then your staff should be putting forward that agenda every week. And so there's some upfront time that you put in, but ultimately the goal is for your staff to help you maximize your outcome, not take away from it. It shouldn't be something that is, taking away from what you're trying to do.
When I became a legislator, I really looked at staff as they're here to help me. I'm going to ask for things, and hopefully everything's going to work out. It didn't. I'll just be honest.
I was going to say, spoiler alert. How did that go?
Spoiler alert, it didn't work out. I have reflected a lot on it. I invested no time or energy into that stuff.
Yeah.
We failed because of me.
Yeah. I feel like that's a really common experience, though, that everyone goes through. Especially, have you managed before? Was this your first time doing management?
I was in the military. So have I been in positions of leadership before? Yes. But this was something different. In the military, everyone knows their role and knows their duties. Like those things are pretty spelled out.
Yeah.
And this was a much more amorphous situation.
You bring up such a good point there, because this really applies to, I think, legislators and people who are the boss or the leader. If you're a mid-level manager, this may not apply as much. but you basically have a blank canvas. And so as a legislator, and as you've seen, we all get to set our agenda. We get to choose how we spend our days, what our goals are. And there's a really wide range of ways that people spend their time and run their offices. And I think that's like the first thing is like, how much clarity do you have? Have you set good goals? Have you set expectations? Have you communicated those clearly? So that's like a bucket of things that you have to do. You have to basically create like a mini business plan if you are a legislator of what are my goals? What's my brand? What are the areas I'm focusing on? You and I touched on this before we started recording, but like that environment is so important. And part of the environment is mindset. And so like I always say that a leader's mindset becomes the team's mindset. If you have vague goals, you're going to get vague outcomes. If you have chaotic instructions or a chaotic project management experience, your staff will respond with a chaotic work product. And yeah, those are a bunch of the buckets that I see as the universe of being a good boss and things to think about that not everyone really considers.
So I want to talk about the other book that you recommended to me, which was by Simon Sinek, Leaders Eat Last. I'm going to play a clip of him talking about an officer who has been rescuing his soldiers from the field in Afghanistan.
There's a man by the name of Captain William Swenson, who recently was awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor for his actions on September 8th, 2009. On that day, a column of American and Afghan troops were making their way through a part of Afghanistan to help protect a group of government officials. The column came under ambush and was surrounded on 3 sides. And amongst many other things, Captain Swenson was recognized for running into live fire to rescue the wounded and pull out the dead. One of the people he rescued was a sergeant, and he and a comrade were making their way to a medevac helicopter. And what was remarkable about this day is, by sheer coincidence, one of the medevac medics happened to have a GoPro camera on his helmet and captured the whole scene on camera. It shows Captain Swenson and his comrade bringing this wounded soldier who'd received a gunshot to the neck. They put him in the helicopter, and then you see Captain Swenson bend over and give him a kiss before he turns around to rescue more. I saw this, and I thought to myself,
where do people like that come from? What is that? That is some deep emotion when you would want to do that. There's a love there. And I want to know, why is it that I don't have people that I work with like that? In the military, they give medals to people who are willing to sacrifice themselves so that others may gain. In business, we give bonuses to people who are willing to sacrifice others so that we may gain. So I asked myself, where do people like this come from? And my initial conclusion was that they're just better people. That's why they're attracted to the military. These better people are attracted to this concept of service. But that's completely wrong. What I learned is that it's the environment. And if you get the environment right, every single one of us has the capacity to do these remarkable things. And more importantly, others have that capacity too. I've had the great honor of getting to meet some of these who we would call heroes, who've put themselves and put their lives at risk to save others. And I asked them, why would you do it? Why did you do it? And they all say the same thing, because they would have done it for me. It's this deep sense of trust and cooperation. So trust and cooperation are really important here. The problem with concepts of trust and cooperation is that they are feelings. They're not instructions.
How do you create an environment in which your people are willing to die for the cause? I think that's like the overarching message in part of this book is like in the military, you want people to be willing to go into harm's way to potentially die for the cause.
Yeah, I think that's fascinating. It's been a really long time since I've looked at Leaders Eat Last, and so I'd be curious to revisit it. But I think that so much language that's used for leadership in business is like war, fight, sacrifice, die, and it just doesn't have to be that way. I look at Sarah Blakely, who is the youngest self-made billionaire, and she talks repeatedly about feminine leadership, which is something I've been talking and writing about a lot lately. And what if we all, like, instead of dying for each other, we thrived for each other? What if we were all just happy and even and worked at an even pace, and we were all passionate, and we were all really energized about a specific goal that we're marching towards, but we weren't killing ourselves over it, because that's not sustainable. So I do find that kind of language interesting.
I hear that about the death and dying for the cause being more melodramatic than it needs to be for this particular conversation. However, one point that he makes that's true is that folks can become very focused on the particular crisis of now and forget the long-term vision.
One of the things that I believe is a leader's role is to hold that long-term vision, because your staff is doing a lot of the executing in day to day. But I feel that our primary role is to see that long-term and remember that this is like a marathon and not a sprint. And I think everything else is also about perspective. Let's have a plan. Let's define what success looks like. And then if we don't reach that goal of success, let's talk about it. With radical candor, having that open communication. What went wrong? What could I have done better? What could you have done better? Creating, I don't want to use the word safe space, like creating an environment where your team feels that they can talk about what they think, or people feel like they can communicate and be like, you know what? I think I could have really used this from you, and not be afraid that you're going to blow up on them or fire them. Or, oh, you know what? I think we had a great plan, but it didn't work for these unknown reasons. Now we have that knowledge and we'll do better next time. I always felt that it was important for me to like almost manage my team. Like I even see it in my business side where I'm like, if something happens with a client, I'm like, this is a blip. This is 5 minutes of our week. You're not even going to remember this next month. It's not worth getting all worked up over. Remember the bigger picture here. And I'm always like problem solving. I'm like, what went wrong? How do we learn from it? What are we going to do differently next time? And we capture that and we evolve. And that's all we can do, just like we do in real life.
I want to move on to radical candor, but I want to say one more thing about Leaders Eat Last. It's not about picking the right people. It's about creating the environment for people to thrive and feel a sense of purpose and feel committed to the goal, creating that environment. And I think it's such a misfire on my part that I didn't create that environment, because when I am working on legislation to prevent foster kids from being unjustly admitted to psychiatric facilities, that's a just cause. That's a life and death cause.
Yeah.
Like, we can make it about this issue. And I could have created an environment that was about that mission, rather than, did we get a hearing scheduled for Tuesday? Why didn't we get a hearing scheduled for Tuesday? Who do I need to go talk to? Why am I not getting hearings?
Yeah.
It became all about these sort of short-term, day-to-day irritations that I was taking out on my staff. And how could they possibly be committed to saving children if their day-to-day moment is consumed with me blowing up about not having a hearing scheduled on Tuesday?
Yeah, I think there's two parts to that. One is like setting clear expectations right up front. It's like, my expectation is that these are the things that we do for every bill every week. And you can almost create a checklist where it's like every Monday we check in and we know that there's 10 things for every bill we need to tackle. Where are we at on hearings? Where are we at on letters of support? Where are we at on whatever it may be, those things that you have. And just every Monday you have a dedicated time where you're reviewing those things with your staff. And they know that by the end of the week, you're going to want an update on that. Then they feel empowered. And when people feel empowered and have agency, they like want to go and do that work. But when we like micromanage or we don't trust them.
Just to interrupt, because that's the upfront work that you were talking about. Like when you were saying,
you do it one time.
But then I was going to say, I haven't made a 10-part checklist on every bill. Like it's remained amorphous. It's remained nothing written out, nothing typed out.
Yeah. So one of the key things, the number one thing that you need to scale anything, whether it's you're trying to scale the impact you have as a legislator or scale your business, is processes and systems. And so I have an SOP, which is a standard operating procedure for everything. And someone could come into my company, and I have now for 3 years in a row, I've taken maternity leave. I've taken 4 weeks off, 4 months off, 2 years in a row to be a legislator, and my company has run without me. And it's because every single thing that we do is written out in detail. Everyone is clear on what needs to happen and how it happens. And so you should be able to do the thing. Let's imagine that you were out for 2 weeks and you like literally couldn't get out of bed. That should be totally fine, because your staff should be able to be like, that's okay. We know what we do. We know what our projects are. We're very clear in our goals. We know how much time we have left. We have a plan. And so it shouldn't stop the work. Having your staff feel trusted, and then you trusting them that they're going to get it done. Now, if you set that expectation and the work doesn't get done, that's where you go to the next level of escalation of what's going on. Something going on in their personal lives. It could just be as simple as they're lazy or they're not good at their job, but maybe there's something else that's going on that they were unclear about. Maybe they need support. I always ask my staff, I'm like, what obstacles or roadblocks are in the way that I can remove in order for us to get to the next step? And that can be a nicer way to do it, because instead of saying, why wasn't the hearing scheduled for Tuesday? You can say, hey, are there any roadblocks that I can support you in removing that's preventing us from getting a hearing scheduled? So you're showing up as a helper in your role and saying like, how can I empower you to do your job versus like kind of the top down berating. I'm not saying you're doing that. I'm just using the example you gave
Right.
me.
No. And actually, I might be too immersed in these leadership books because I was about to say, if they're quote unquote lazy, I feel like, again, I could take ownership of that as the leader. If I have conveyed the mission in such a way that they're inspired and they want to be a part of this mission, that's a cure for laziness. And I don't want to like overemphasize that perhaps this person's never going to be motivated about foster care or whatever.
Yeah.
But if you can frame it in such a way that people understand how important their work is, and it's not about Representative Andrew Gray.
Yeah.
It's about helping those people. We are lucky to have an office in which when we call, people call back. When we send an email, someone responds.
Yeah.
We have this one moment in time where we have this opportunity to do something worthwhile.
Yeah.
I really missed the forest for the trees so much my first 2 years.
Yeah, I would say don't go so extreme in the opposite direction of where everything is your fault. Like, you're just learning. And I love the truism, hire slowly, fire quickly. You're not going to necessarily be able to hack your way into inspiring like the light of God into every single person. You're just not going to convert everyone to your cause and your vision. And so now when you hire, what are the things that are most important to you? Are you clear on what's most important to you? And then in your hiring process, are you communicating that and getting affirmation that, yes, this is also important to that person? So don't just feel like, no, my job is to over communicate this with all of my staff and make it work and try to get that round peg in the square hole. It's when you're hiring and talking to your staff, or even with your existing staff, I don't know your staffing situation, be like, hey friends, here's my vision for the next 2 years. Here's what I want to work on. Here's what I'm passionate about. Does this feel aligned with you? You set a goal, and then people can very clearly see themselves or not in the vision that you have. And it saves both of you a lot of time. Because if they don't see themselves, like, that's not my jam. I'd rather work in this office because I really care about this other issue.
100%. I will give an example. I have been very involved in trying to get the Betty Davis East Anchorage High School swimming pool open. The staff said, do you mind dealing with that? Because I'm just not interested. And I will be honest, I did go into my office and shut the door and think, excuse me, you work for me. Can't you summon somewhere in your heart some interest in getting a swimming pool open?
We all have to do shitty tasks sometimes. Not every single thing that we do is going to light us up or be super energizing. And so I do just think, I don't know if I sound like an old crony where I'm like, kids these days don't know how to work, but it's sometimes you just have to do work that's not fun. It's not going to be thrilling or strategic or help you grow as a human, but it has to get done. It's just part of the larger web of what's required in the role.
But again, I maybe didn't frame that correctly. The reason why we have so many swimming pools in Anchorage is because in the 60s, we knew that we had the highest drowning rate in the country. And so it was a very strategic thing that we built pools so that kids learned how to swim so they didn't drown.
Yeah.
And closing those pools, especially in parts of town that are the poorest, means that folks who would have otherwise learned to swim don't.
Yeah.
And they're at risk of dying. And so it's going back to that whole battlefield analogy. This is a case of life and death.
Yeah.
It's really a big deal. So I was upset a little bit about, oh, I'm not really into pools. I'm like, I wasn't on swim team either. This isn't about the swim team. It's about something much more than that. And again, I probably have not expressed that articulately enough, often enough for people to understand why that pool being closed is an enormous deal, a life or death deal.
You just did in a very compelling way. Storytelling and connecting to life and death is a very compelling way to light a fire under someone's ass. Like, I think thinking back to environment, I believe it as a leader, and you could do this before next session. Visualize how you want next session to go. How do you feel? How does everyone feel in the office? Should you keep using the bright overhead fluorescent lights, or should you be using the lamps and doing twinkle lights? Think about the literal environment that you're creating. Think about the music that's playing, the way that you speak. Think about the way that you show up for people. Like, for the past 2 years, I had an opening meeting with my staff, and I had like gift packages for them. And I was like, here's the meaning behind the gifts I'm giving you. And like, I gave that speech of like, here's how this year's going to go. Here's what we're going to do. Like, I just gave like basically the impassioned, we'll stick with the war stuff, like the battle cry. Here's why we're fighting this good fight and what it looks like. And that sets the tone for the work that's going to come ahead. It's a very intense 4-month sprint in session. And so I think you can do that. You can think about like, how do I want my staff to feel and how do I want to show up for them? Because the way you show up for them is how they're going to show up for you. It's just like any other kind of relationship. People want to feel seen, heard, and loved. People want to feel about a part of something bigger than themselves, and they want to feel like they're making a difference. And if they're not receiving some kind of affirmation that the work that they're doing matters, they're not going to feel very inspired to help out with the pool, whatever it might be. Again, I'm just using your own examples, but you want to inspire that type of confidence. You want to make people feel good. You want to make them feel like the work you do matters, because then when they feel that way, they're like, yeah, my work does matter, and they're going to want to keep showing up for you.
Perfect segue to Kim Scott's radical candor. She was like a former executive at Google. She has this really incredible career. What I liked about her book is it was very practical. She talks about radical candor. And I think we'll just listen to a clip really fast of her explaining an issue that she had with an employee, which I think everyone will be able to relate to.
I want to tell you a story about possibly the most painful moment of my career. I had just hired this person, Alex. We'll call this person Alex. And I liked Alex a lot. Alex was smart. Alex was charming. Alex was funny. Alex brought a little levity to the office. Everybody loved working with Alex. One problem with Alex. Alex was doing terrible work. Absolutely sort of creative and unusual, but tons of sloppy mistakes. I was so puzzled, I couldn't understand what was going on, because Alex had this incredible resume, this great history of accomplishments. I learned much later that Alex was smoking pot in the bathroom 3 times a day. But I didn't know any of that at the time. All I knew is that Alex would hand stuff into me with shame in his eyes. He knew his work wasn't nearly good enough. And I would say something to him along the lines of, oh, Alex, you're so smart. You're so awesome. Everybody loves working with you. This is a great start. Maybe you can make it just a little bit better, which, of course, he never did. Okay, so let's pause for a moment. What was going on there? Part of it was truly ruinous empathy. I really did like Alex, and I really did not want to hurt his feelings. But if I'm honest with myself, there was something more insidious going on as well, because Alex was popular and Alex was sensitive. And there was part of me that was afraid that if I told Alex in no uncertain terms that his work wasn't nearly good enough, he would get upset. He might even start to cry. And then everyone would think I was a big you-know-what. And so the part of me that was worried about my reputation as a leader, that was the manipulative insincerity part. The part of me that was worried about Alex's feelings, that was the ruinous empathy part. So this kind of toxic mixture goes on for about 10 months, and eventually the inevitable happens. And I realized that if I don't fire Alex, I'm going to lose all my best performers. Because not only have I been unfair to Alex, not to tell him so that he could fix things, I've been unfair to the whole team. Their deliverables were late because his deliverables were late. They couldn't spend as much time on their work as they needed to because they were constantly having to redo his work. And the people who were the best performers on my team, they were just going to quit. They wanted to be able to work at a place where they could do their best work. And so I sat down to have a conversation with Alex that I should have started, frankly, 10 months previously. And when I finished explaining to him where things stood, he pushed his chair back from the table. He looked me right in the eye and he said, "Why didn't you tell me?" And as that question was going around in my head with no good answer, he looked at me again and he said, "Why didn't anyone tell me? I thought you all cared about me." And now I realize that by not telling Alex, thinking I was being so nice, sparing his feelings, he's now getting fired as a result of it. Not so nice after all. It was a terrible moment in my career, but it was too late to save Alex. Even Alex at this point agreed he should go because his reputation on the team was just shot. All I could do in that moment was make myself a very solemn promise that I would never make that mistake again, and that I would do everything in my power to help other people avoid making that mistake.
We've heard her relay something that I think we could all relate to, because especially for us who are new bosses, it's human nature. We want everyone to like us.
Yeah.
And I think, why would I not give honest feedback to my staff and say, hey, this is not good, like you need to redo this whole thing, is because I know he was working on it for 3 hours and he tried, and I don't want to hurt his feelings. And underneath that, I want him to like me.
Yeah, I think that this is such a powerful example because I have an exact story like this. There was someone who I brought into my company early on, and I felt that I had done them such a huge disservice because for 2 years, essentially, they would do something and it wouldn't be quite right, and I would just fix it, or I would do it for them. There was no feedback. And we were essentially sharing responsibilities in the company. And I basically took on all of the hard, miscellaneous, like kind of shitty tasks. So it was like, I took on the pool tasks, dealing with the pool, because I just wanted them to work on like the deep work and the strategy. And that built resentment in me instead of using radical candor and communicating, hey, here's what needs to get done. It's not always fun, but we're all in it together and we just have to get it done. I know that this isn't a fun task, but I'm in it with you. And this is just part of, it's the shit sandwich we have to eat, as Liz Gilbert says, as part of the larger work. And I built so much resentment over 2 years. And when that relationship ended, it flipped where I was like, oh my God, I'm a terrible person. I wasted 2 years of this person's like career where I could have invested in them and helped them get better. And I could have helped them grow. And for 2 years, I basically shielded them from everything, fixed all of their mistakes, and they were never able to grow. And 2 years later, they think that they're doing great work, and it's actually not great. And yeah, I think that's so important to find a way to communicate. I think the way that you can do that and get over that fear of people liking you is set the expectation of, hey, I'm going to fuck up. You're going to fuck up. We're both learning and growing. I may be the leader or the boss, but I'm not at a cap where I'm like, I'm at the top of the mountain and I know everything. And create it so I'm always open to ways that I can support you. And I want you to know that when I give you feedback, it's in the service of this work and because I want to see you grow. That goes back to that expectation setting. If you start session by sitting down and saying, hey, it's going to be moving fast. I'm going to have feedback for you. Please don't take it personally. Please know that when I give you feedback, it's in service of this larger mission that we're all here for. When you say that in advance, it comes out so much better because then in the heat of the moment, when you're giving that feedback, they aren't freaking out and being like, oh my God, I messed up. You've already set the expectation of like, hey, this is obviously going to happen. Perfect doesn't exist.
I'm not good at accepting feedback. One thing that Kim Scott does a really good job of is over and over again saying that it has to be a two-way street. You have to be willing to accept constructive feedback from your staff.
Yeah.
That they need to be able to tell you, hey, you know what? You're not approaching this correctly. I think we should try this differently. And know that they're not going to get fired when they say, hey, I think this whole bill is misguided. This whole bill is not going to achieve what you think it's going to. Creating an environment where they can say that to you is super important. I think another reason why I hate giving negative feedback is because I know with so many things, when somebody tells me that I should have done it differently, it kills me inside. And the person who does this the most frequently is my husband. Mm. Yeah. And what I almost always do is explode, and then I make the change.
Yeah.
And you know what I mean? And we've had so many arguments. I'll just use a real life thing. I had to give a graduation speech a couple of weeks ago. I wrote the speech the night before, and I gave it to him that night. And he told me that it was boring and that it wasn't the typical speech that I give, and that I should include something that was more meaningful and personal, and I should tell a story. And my reaction was, I've been thinking about this speech for a really long time. There are a lot of things in here that I really wanted to say. I believe that this speech is really conveying important information for these graduates, whether or not you're interested in it. And I really went off.
Yeah.
And his response was, and this is why I don't want to give you honest feedback, because you can't hear it.
Yeah.
And then, of course, I woke up the next morning and I was like, he's totally right. I scrapped the whole middle part of my speech. I added a story. You know what I mean? I made all of the changes.
Yeah, this could get us off the rails, but this is why I believe that when you are in a position of power, you have a duty to do a lot of work on yourself in terms of like therapy, inner child work, shadow work. All of those things are so important because I resonate with you on like feedback. I have a lot of issues from childhood around perfectionism, like A+ was all that was acceptable and A- got you in trouble. Mm-hmm. And so I had to do a lot of work on myself as a leader of overcoming a lot of those things as well. And so I just think that you're bringing up a perfect example. You can see the parallel between you and your spouse and what you're doing in the office. And so for me, when I work on things, it ends up flowing in every part of my life. It doesn't just impact. Like when you're talking about being a good boss, what you're really talking about is being someone who's a good collaborator, who's able to build things and do it effectively. So whether that's in your family, whether that's with your kids and helping them grow up to be the best, or whether it's trying to get policy passed, all of these skills are transferable. And I'll give a shout out to Tristan if he listens to this. He gives me amazing feedback. He had spent many years in the building before I got there. And I had told him, I want to be better. This is what I care about. You can't hurt my feelings because it's not about me. We're in service of a larger mission. So in the same way that you tell your staff, get inspired by the pool because there's a bigger story here. Remember that for yourself. Like when you're receiving that feedback, when you have someone that you trust and you love and they're giving you something, trust that they're doing that because they want to support you and being the best you can and having the biggest impact. It's not an attack on you. It's in service of helping you be better. Mm-hmm. And if you don't want to hear it, don't ask for it. But that doesn't really work in leadership because like you have to get the feedback. Mm-hmm. You have to create that space. And Tristan has done an amazing job of like, I wouldn't have said that. Don't talk this way. When you're in a meeting with the governor, don't do this thing. Like next time, do that. Like he's just very straightforward and he knows I'm not going to fire him. I always say, thank you. I appreciate that. And then I'll ask follow up. I'm like, what do you think I can do with this? Or how would you have handled that differently? And he helps me be better. I feel like that was how I was able to get so much done is I attribute so much of that to my staff feeling that they could tell me where I'm underperforming. And if Tristan never felt like he was safe enough to tell me the ways that I wasn't doing a great job in different areas, I think I would have been a pretty flat legislator. Mm-hmm. So I just think that's a good example. Your staff can help you be so much better. We're all in the trenches together. Mm-hmm. Keep the war analogies going.
I watched a lot of TED Talks this morning preparing for this interview. Kim Scott said that there was a poll done where folks had to decide, would they rather have an asshole boss who got things done or an extraordinarily kind boss who got nothing done. Mm. And the vast majority would prefer an asshole boss who got things done than an extraordinarily nice boss that
Why
got
not
nothing
both,
done.
though?
No. The point, I think the point she was making was that we fear giving negative feedback is going to drive our employees away. Mm-hmm. But the truth is that if it's in service of achieving goals, people forgive you for that. And I've noticed that in the building. There are definitely some not very warm and fuzzy people who have the most dedicated staff I've ever seen.
A boss who is maybe not the most warm-hearted person, but has really dedicated staff. I think they're probably choosing their battles. And I think that's an important thing to remember of like, you yourself as the leader have to hold that long-term vision and don't lose your shit over something small you're not even going to remember a week from now. It's choose the battles of what matters. It's so important to understand what drives them because then you also learn how to best motivate them and getting done what you want to get done. Love languages, which I know is like probably over talked about and might sound a little bit trite, is so important. We all have different ways that we accept communication or affirmation. I do think it's important to know like, how do you feel rewarded and how can I show you that the work you do matters? Asking that simple question in the beginning of session, it's, I really like verbal affirmation, or I really appreciate like an quality time, like you taking me to lunch or something. It will go so far in building that loyalty. And then again, when you don't have that high turnover, you spend so much wasted time restarting from the bottom every time you have to get new staff.
You've alluded to it already, but some of the things that we see are folks who have expectations of their staff being present from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m.
The job is different for everyone. So this advice does not apply to someone running an orthodontic office, right? This advice does not apply. You need to have a receptionist who's there 9 to 5. I believe in prioritizing outcomes, not hours. If you say, these are the outcomes I want, and someone can get it done in 10 hours, why do they need to spend 30 hours twiddling their thumbs or staring at a screen? It doesn't make sense. And the other thing, especially for service-based workers or knowledge workers, the more you do the work, the better you get. And so if the work's getting done, you're hitting your revenue targets in a business, or if you're hitting your goals and with legislation, it doesn't matter. I've told this story before. So I've been running my company for over 8 years, and my right-hand woman, my COO, Clara, has been with me for 3.5 years now, 4 years this December. And 4 years, unlimited time off, complete flexibility, never an expectation of 9 to 5. I've never checked her hours. I have no idea. For the past 4 years, she could be working 20 hours a week and I wouldn't know. And it does not matter because she absolutely kills it. She gets everything done and then some. She's just the best. She's amazing. And it's because I completely empower her and I've set clear expectations of what matters. And I think that people will resent you really quickly. Like this idea of 9 to 5 and sitting in a desk is so outdated. And it's just, there's so many opportunities now where you can have complete flexibility that to not offer that is going to narrow the pool of who's going to want to work with you and work for you. And I think, again, you need to trust your team to get their job done, and you shouldn't be micromanaging how many hours they're sitting at a desk. just for appearances.
Okay, last question, nuts and bolts. Let's say someone is a brand new legislator. Like, what are the first steps to establishing a healthy office environment?
First step at your very first caucus, raise your hand and say, I'm brand new and I'm really nervous about managing. I think where so many people fail is they're afraid to be vulnerable. And so in your first caucus, be like, guys, I've never managed before. I'm a brand new legislator. You're going to be surrounded by senior legislators. Can I meet with each of you for 30 minutes to get all of your best tips on managing an office? Can I see your behind the scenes? Everyone wants to share and help each other out. So that's the first thing is I would tell people, I don't know what I'm doing. And then when I've hired people, your staff, especially if you're in the majority, likely knows what they're doing. And so again, sitting down and taking off your representative hat and thinking you need to know everything and being like, this is my first time being here. What advice do you have for me? How have you seen offices best be run? Staff, especially in the Capitol, are brilliant. They all talk. They all know. And I have heard from other staff who've told me things of, I already know who all the bad offices are. I know who the good offices are because all the staff talks. And so talk to your staff, like break that fourth wall and say, hey, what do all the staff members bitch about over beers? What are the things they hate? What do they like? What do you think is best? Trust your staff who actually knows what they're doing when you don't. And then the third thing is take the time before you start to have a very clear vision and plan. Can all three of your staff members, after 2 weeks with you, know and clearly articulate, this is what success looks like. This is the vision we're marching towards. This is the bigger thing I'm a part of. These are the goals that we have, and it's very clear. And this is the container we're working in. If they can't do that, then you have failed. And so do that work. Take the time to be like, who am I about? What is my brand? What is my story? What is this office going to be about? What's the lane we're going to be in? And make that very clear. And then I guess the final thing going off of that is know yourself. Know where your weaknesses are. Know how you like to work. Communicate clearly. There's no such thing as like over communicating in this type of role. And so set those clear expectations up front. It's a lot less awkward than having to bring them up retroactively as things go awry. So if you're struggling as a leader or if you have problems with your staff, instead of going to a book looking for the answers, take 10 minutes to sit quietly and think. Because you probably know what's wrong. You just may not want to face it yet. If you're going to be a legislator and you're listening to this, please talk to other legislators. Don't go and reinvent the wheel. Talk to other legislators and talk to staff and interview them and ask them what works and how can I be more effective. You have the sources at your fingertips.
You're not running for re-election. What's your plan for the next year? Where are you going to be? What are you going to be doing?
Yeah, as I mentioned, I've been running a company for 8 years. I run a creative and communications agency, launching social good initiatives, and I have another company helping consultants grow. And so I'm going to be just less busy. I'm going to be running my 2 companies and being a mom, and I'm traveling. I'm really excited. I'm going to Greece next month. So I'm just like going back to having a baseline busy life instead of an insanely busy life where I have 3 jobs and 2 kids and everything else going on. But yeah, besides, as many people know who might be listening to this, I've been working really hard to still support everyone. I've been hosting fundraisers, and I'm really eager to still support and advocate for the things I care about, just not as an elected official. So I'm not going anywhere. I'll just be showing up in a different form.
Thanks for that, and thanks for being on the show today.
Thank you so much.
You will find links to the TED Talks I excerpted in today's episode in the show notes, as well as my previous interview with Jennie Armstrong. Thank you, listeners. If you like what you heard, please subscribe, rate, and review us. To contact me, email rep.andrew.gray@akleg.gov or call 907-269-0123.